Well, President Obama's decision to halt all new deepwater drilling will be felt the hardest in the Gulf, but it also takes off the table a controversial drilling plan in Alaska. Clean Sky's Dan Goldstein takes a deeper look at Shell's plans in the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas and how the White House decision may delay a bigger fight over oil.
The Chukchi is a garden to my people. The garden that keep my people alive for thousands of years.
To Earl Kingik, the only giants that belong in the seas off Alaska's North Slope are whales, not drilling rigs. Kingik is a leader of the Inupiat tribe, whose people have fished the Chukchi and Beaufort waters for centuries, hunting whales each spring for food. Shell was to start drilling in these waters here in July, but to Kingik, oil and water just don't mix.
Next thing we know, we haven't seen any animals in my area for at least 2 or 3 years.
Now, after the Gulf disaster, Kingik and the Inupiats are getting a break, at least for 6 months.
The reality is that there are issues that are of significant concern in the Arctic. Those issues relate to the oil response capabilities.
Well, I join with most Alaskans in expressing a disappointment that Shell will not be allowed to proceed with exploration activities this summer.
Despite the delay, interest in drilling off Alaska's North Slope won't go away. This area has some of the richest finds of crude oil in the U.S., even greater than the Gulf of Mexico. Shell spent more than $2 billion 2 years ago to acquire the drilling rights. The company says the water depth, a little over 100 feet, makes the oil easier to extract than in deep water. And the oil pressures in this reservoir are expected to be a third less than that of the failed Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf. But court fights over the sensitive area have dragged on for the past 4 years. Shell President Marvin Odom told Congress in November he was losing patience with the government.
The regulatory system has worked well in the Gulf of Mexico for 50 years. The federal system for the Alaska OCS, by contrast, is in need of attention.
But Shell may just have to keep waiting longer. Interior Secretary Ken Salazar has halted most new permits for deepwater offshore drilling. And if environmental groups have their way, drilling in Alaska could be halted for good.
From our perspective, there are fundamental problems with the process in the Arctic, with the response capacity, and with just the basic science of the way things work in the Arctic region.
Kristen Miller represents the Alaska Wilderness League in Washington. She says the Gulf of Mexico disaster shows drilling, even in shallow water in Alaska, is too dangerous right now.
We feel that the plans that Shell has going forward in the Arctic are inadequate. In some ways, you can use the Gulf as an example. For instance, in the Gulf, they didn't account for the possibility of a blowout, and the situation is the same in the Arctic.
Shell declined to talk to Clean Skies News, but the company in recent days has tried to reassure the government and members of Congress that it's learning the lessons of the Gulf disaster, which has now spilled more oil than the Exxon Valdez. In a recent letter obtained by Clean Skies News, Shell says it's made changes in its drilling plan. Shell plans to test the blowout preventer, the device that failed in the Gulf, every week instead of every 2 weeks. Shell will also have MMS inspectors on board the drill ship during exploration.
I do feel that Shell had really taken those extra steps, not only in their initial plan that they had presented, but in the add-ons that they offered up to the Department of Interior after the Gulf spill.
But some critics say that might not be good enough for Alaska.
In the Gulf, this is an area in which they've been developing for years. They have lots of infrastructure, they have lots of boats, they had lots of boom. They had all of the things that you would need to respond to an oil spill right at their fingertips. In the Arctic, you're coming from hundreds of miles away in lots of cases. You're going to an area that has very small villages that may not even have a boat dock.
While Shell's offshore record has been good the past 5 years, the company was fined more than $250,000 over a 7-year stretch, starting in 1998. And new questions emerged this week over the agency that's supposed to regulate offshore drilling. Investigators probing MMS before 2007 found officials took gifts from the industry it was supposed to regulate, and even allowed companies to fill out safety reports that regulators rubber-stamped. Liz Birnbaum, the head of MMS, last week resigned, and the promises of safety aren't much comfort to Earl Kingik.
I had a chance to go down to the Gulf for a few days and look at the people down there and look at the operation that's going on. And there's no way they'll stop oil spill down there. You know, they got high technology, but the high technology is not working.
Meaning the battle of oil versus wildlife in Alaska could just be heating up. Dan Goldstein, Clean Skies News.